please join me in welcoming to the stage Valerie Jarrett.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Jennifer. Good afternoon, everyone. How are you all doing? Isn't Jennifer amazing? Come on, one more round of applause for Jennifer. To Jennifer, to her board chair, Beth Johnson. Beth, where are you? I know you're here this evening, this afternoon. Thank you. To the remainder of your board, to your sponsors, your grantees, and the few really good, brave men who were in the audience. We're delighted to see you as well. You're a part of the solution here. Together we thrive. When I was backstage listening to Jennifer talk about that, I couldn't help but to think about my own life. So I was one of those single moms out there that you hear so much about, but I was one of the lucky ones. I had two parents who lived a mile away from me and who gave me throughout my life unconditional love and support and paid for college. And when my daughter was very little, came over and didn't even call themselves babysitters. They just were part of our caregiving circle because we do know it takes a community. I always had high-paying jobs and I could afford the absolute best child care. And I had the same woman who took care of my daughter from the time she was 3 months old until she went off to college. I was one of the lucky ones. But what we all know and recognize is that there are so many women and girls out there who don't have those advantages, and it is about them that we dedicate ourselves. The very first conversation I had with President Obama 25 years ago, before he was even married, let alone entered public life, was about just that. He shared his story of what it was like being raised by a single mother, about his grandmother with whom he lived for a few years, and he watched her go to work every single day, bright and talented and training men who leapfrogged over her, and the disappointment he saw in her eyes when she came home and shared her story with him. His mom, while she was in school, had to depend on food stamps to support their family for a while. And then he married this amazing woman. How about a little round of applause for our First Lady? And then he learned up close and personal what it was like to try to raise two young children when you have two parents with busy careers pulling them in opposite directions. And it was a reckoning for him, and he and the First Lady speak quite openly about how hard it was when the girls were little and he was in Springfield or then on the campaign trail and she was at home bearing a disproportionate share of the responsibilities. But also, he talks quite often about the fact that they too were the lucky ones. And now they have these two amazing daughters. And my daughter is full grown. And we talk often about how our wish for our children is the same. We want them to be able to reach their dreams because that's what every little girl deserves. So you can imagine how excited I was 2 months into office when the president created the White House Council of Women and Girls. And throughout that process since day one, I have been joined by Tina Chin, who's in the audience. Tina, where are you? Come on. Tina is now the First Lady's Chief of Staff, but also since day one has been the Executive Director of the Council on Women and Girls. And we are also now joined by Jordan Kaplan, who's the Deputy, and a group throughout, not just the White House, but throughout the administration, because the mandate we received from President Obama since day one is to ensure that in all of our programs, in all of our policies, in all of our legislation, throughout the federal government, for the first time ever, everyone who's on our council, priority is to ensure that we're looking out for women and girls each and every day. So as we near the sunset of the Obama administration, it's a good time to take stock and look at just how much we have done and what we've done. We've prioritized STEM education because we know those are the jobs of the future. We've put the spotlight and worked in partnership with media and toy companies to make sure that those unconscious and conscious biases are rooted out so that we know our boys and our girls start out on that important even playing field. The First Lady launched Reach Higher that's intended to help our adolescent girls and boys aspire to go to college, apply to college, make financial aid easier for them to get into college and have the resources they need, and then to graduate from college. We've worked very hard, and as you saw just this past week, we announced record high school graduation rates throughout the country. We focused on keeping the historic low teenage pregnancy rates at a very low point because we know teenage pregnancy is a barrier to economic self-sufficiency. The president launched, together with the vice president, It's on Us. 1 in 5 women are sexually assaulted while in college, and we know that oftentimes it starts before college. That's an epidemic, and we must do everything we can to stop it. And then there is the ACA. So now women may no longer be discriminated against just because they're a woman. I didn't realize when I was a young adult that women, just because they're women and children-bearing ages, were paying higher premiums. And we all now know that women who tend to put ourselves last can now have regular checkups, which includes, yes, birth control and screening for cancer and domestic abuse counseling, all without a copay, so there's no more excuses for us going in for those regular checkups. Our uninsured rate in the United States is at the lowest level it has ever been. And yes, we support working families in everything that we do. The very first bill you all now know, and you've known since it was signed, was the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act. The president is very proud of that. But we also know it's not enough, which is why he's called on Congress to pass the Paycheck Fairness Act, again, to make sure that employers are not penalizing their employees for sharing pay. They have failed to act, something which we've grown accustomed to, but it isn't good enough. So the president also signed an executive order prohibiting federal contractors from retaliating against their employees from sharing equal pay, because how do you know you're not getting equal pay if you can't talk about the pay? Isn't that right? In addition, the president expanded the earned income tax credit, the child care tax credit, the college tax credit, and he's challenged Congress to do more so that we're putting more dollars into the pockets of those hardworking families. The president has encouraged Congress, state and local elected officials, and the private sector to adopt 21st century workplace policies such as paid leave and paid sick leave. We are the only developed country in the world that doesn't have a paid leave or a paid sick leave policy. How on earth could we compete globally unless we attack these impediments to working families? Over the last 8 years, the number of private sector workers with paid leave has grown by 6.2 million, and 10.6 million more Americans now have access to paid leave, but it is time for Congress to act so that we have a national policy. More than half of our workers who earn minimum wage are women. The minimum wage when the president took office was $6.55. That would translate into $13,100. How can you possibly raise a family on $1,300 a year? And we all know that working moms, 40% of working moms are either the primary or the sole breadwinner. Put yourselves for just a moment into the shoes of those women and imagine what their life is like. And then you have to ask yourself, why would Congress not act? Why would they not raise the minimum wage? But we are heartened, since the president called on Congress to do so, 61 communities, 18 states, and the District of Columbia have all taken action to raise the minimum wage. We've expanded opportunities for entrepreneurs. We're the largest purchaser of goods and services in the country, and so we put our buying power behind it, and we aggressively go after ensuring that women-owned businesses receive the 5% of contracts that we know they deserved, and we're never satisfied. We're constantly trying to do more. The Census Bureau recently announced that the poverty rate in our country fell in 2015 at the largest amount since 1968. So we are moving people out of poverty. At the same time, even though our economy has rebounded, our unemployment rate that went from a high of 10% now down, cut in half, but we were concerned about growth. And so it was also important that in 2015, the typical family income went up by $2,800. $2,800, that's a 5.2% increase, the largest increase in recorded history. And we've helped build a national movement for criminal justice reform at the federal, state, and local level, because we know that whether you're an incarcerated woman, a mom forced to raise her children alone because your spouse is in prison, or a child being raised without a parent at home, that mass incarceration is tearing our families and our communities apart. We spend $80 billion a year on criminal justice. I could think of a lot of other things to do with that $80 billion, couldn't you? And even though the president has commuted 774 sentences since he took office, that's more than the last 11 presidents combined, the number of women who are incarcerated has gone up 400% in the last 30 years. 400%. And behind each of those women is a story. Several months ago, when the president announced a round of commutations, he had lunch with a few of the folks who have had their sentences commuted over the years. And one woman who I am not likely to ever forget, Kimba Smith, told us her story. She was 7 months pregnant when she was convicted and sent to prison. She gave birth 2 months later. 2 days after she gave birth, her child was taken from her, fortunately, and given to her parents. But I tried to imagine what it must have been like as I thought about the 2 days after I gave birth to my daughter and what was going on in my heart and in my mind. And I couldn't imagine what she went through. And yet women and girls all across our country are facing that horrible, horrible moment in time that Kimba faced. And so the question is, shouldn't we be doing everything within our power to ensure people never get caught up in the criminal justice system in the first place so that that never happens? And on the international stage, again, the First Lady comes in. As you all know, she launched about a year and a half ago, Let Girls Learn. There are nearly 100 million teenage girls around the world who are not in school. They need to be in school. And we're going to engage our young girls in a world platform to ensure on a global level we keep our children in school because, again, that's the path to economic prosperity, and we need your support in that. So we've made a lot of progress over the years. But we also know that women and girls of color, as Jennifer said, face some unique challenges. That's why early in the Obama administration, the White House Council on Women and Girls started an all-of-government process where to better understand the challenges that women and girls face so that we could address those challenges. We held listening sessions with a wide range of stakeholders from across our country who are working directly to improve the lives of women and girls of color. We launched a database call throughout the federal government, every single agency, to find out what we were doing in that space to better inform our policies going forward. So for example, a typical woman working full-time earns today about 80 cents on the dollar. Yet, and that's up from 77 cents 8 years ago. So it's a hard needle to move. But the disparity for women of color is even greater. African American women earn 66 cents on the dollar, and Latino women earn 55 cents on the dollar compared to the white population. Our analysis led to a report we released in November called Advancing Equity for Women and Girls of Color, and we determined that our focus should be in 5 issue areas that are especially affecting this population: school discipline, unplanned pregnancy, access to STEM education, meeting the needs of vulnerable youth throughout appropriate responses from the public systems, and economic opportunity. This valuable work has led to 2 important coalitions that we also announced in November of this year, and which are vital to carrying out progress into the future, November of last year. The first deals with the fact that there just isn't enough data to show us the exact full range of disparities that women and girls of color face and how to address them. So what do? We worked with Melissa Harris Perry and the Anna Julia Cooper Center at Wake Forest to launch a $75 million academic collaborative to expand the research that's being done for women and girls of color. And I want to just thank Melissa Perry for all of her incredible work in this space. Second, and that's of course where you all come in, is that we launched Prosperity Together with 20 foundations committed to investing $100 million total over the next 5 years to create opportunity and advance equity for women and girls of color. That's $100 million, everybody. That's a lot of money, but that money could grow, right? Prosperity, as you heard from Jennifer, Prosperity Together is investing in low-income women and families with a special focus specifically on job training and child care programs. And we're proud that our efforts are bearing fruit across the country. Earlier this year at the United States of Women Summit, 8 foundations, including the Washington Area Women's Foundation, committed to starting young women's initiatives in their communities to empower the very voices of women of color that we're trying to help. And all across our country, the same is happening, from Colorado to Dallas to Iowa to Minnesota, sprouting out examples of where we can lift up and help women and girls of color. Just a few weeks ago at the White House, we hosted a forum on trauma-informed school discipline that brought together educational leaders from around the country. Black girls are 8% of the enrollment in school, but 14% receive 1 or more out-of-school suspensions. We have got to keep our children in the classroom, and we have to give our teachers the tools they need to enable them to do so. Throughout the last nearly 8 years, I've had the privilege of traveling our country. I've seen the best and I've seen the most challenging. Right here in Washington, I visited an EduCare center where I saw these delicious newborn babies to age 4 getting the kind of quality early childhood education that we know every child deserves. I also visited a detention center with girls ages 12 to 16 who had been determined too dangerous to stay with their families while they were awaiting trial. And after spending an hour and a half with those young girls, you know what I thought? What they actually needed was some love. They needed somebody to set some high expectations for them. They needed consistency. They needed to be fed on a regular basis. They needed to go to sleep, not terrified about what might happen to them in the course of the night. They needed to be able to walk to school without being in fear. They needed to know that they were safe from assault, whether physical or sexual or mental. They needed us. They needed each and every one of us. I've traveled as far away as Compton, California, and visited a juvenile courtroom where young girls were coming in time and time again for various offenses. And thanks to one observant judge, she discovered what all of those girls had in common. Each of them was a victim of commercial sexual exploitation. And so she created a program out of thin air that helps the girls get back on their feet, the social services they need, the temporary housing in the event that their homes were not suitable, whatever they needed to nurture them and get them back on track. And then she dismissed the charges against them because she realized they were not the criminals, they were the victims, and she wanted them to survive and thrive. And one woman has made the difference in hundreds and hundreds of lives, just to show you the power that we have. Here again in Washington, I have visited a center for fair girls, these amazing young women who have been victims of sexual trafficking. And thanks again to an incredible program helping these young women get back on their feet, find their self-esteem, heal. A round of applause for fair girls. I hear somebody knows something about them. And I heard Mary Zines mentioned earlier. She invited me out to visit the Urban Alliance, and I sat around a conference room table with some amazing young people who asked me questions that were really hard and challenging, and they made me think in a way that was so refreshing and encouraging. And I watched them just stand taller and taller and taller, again, because we're investing in our young people because we value them. So, in closing, I've seen what works and I've seen what doesn't. And we know what the solutions are, and we have a blueprint for how we can continue to do the important research to find our way and ensure that every girl and every woman has an opportunity to compete on an even playing field in this greatest country on earth. But in order to make our progress go forward, we need all of you. As I mentioned, obviously, we are in the last few months of the Obama administration, but as the president reminds me every day when I start to get teary-eyed about the inevitable, he says, Valerie, we're about to join the most important office of all, and that's the office of citizen. And that's the office that we all currently hold, right? So one of my favorite expressions now, which kind of sums up the last 8 years, is it's things seem absolutely impossible until they're inevitable. And with your help, the future of our young girls will be bright, and let's make that inevitable. Thank you very much, everybody.